So when I left off on my last journey, I left Madrid and the Camino de Santiago, and I decided I wanted to go kite surfing in the Red Sea because I heard it was just epic and probably one of the best places in the world. And I was looking for a little bit of warm weather and sunshine, and the Red Sea's got lots of that, as well as lots of world-class kite surfers and a great place to sharpen your skills. So I went down to the Red Sea for about 2 weeks, but occasionally we have non-wind days where there's no wind and we can't do anything. So I thought, you know what? I'm going to go somewhere special, and Luxor was on my list because I had been to the Great Pyramids but never been to Luxor.
Well, good morning, everyone. I started another Camino. I'm in Egypt, and I woke up at 4 in the morning, catching a cab, if you will, all the way down to Luxor, which is going to be a 4-hour drive through the desert, and it's dark, and I'm just going to pick up the cab right now. And I'm going to go visit a 4,000-year-old temple called Karnak, along with Luxor Temple and Valley of the Kings and Valley of the Queens and a lot of other great stuff. But it's early and the journey begins.
So about 3 hours into the journey, we stopped at Dendira. Now this is just before you get to Luxor, about an hour outside. And Dendira Temple is amazing, and it's one that most people never go to. And before we got there, my driver drove me through some back streets, and oh my gosh, it was literally like stepping back in time a couple hundred years ago. Very, very primitive, a horse-drawn carriage in front of us. I saw a lot of that, and just mud houses and you know, dirt streets, and the people were very friendly. And then we finally, when Dendera Temple opened up, we went there. Now this is very seldom visited by people. I was the only one there when it first opened, and finally a couple other people came in. And the beautiful thing about Dendera is it's beautiful, and the paintings are very, very well preserved, better preserved than in Luxor or some of the other highly visited temples where you go and there's thousands of people, and there's some people there restoring some of them, cleaning very carefully with the toothbrush all the little detailed work. But you could see the vibrant colors. Now remember, these temples were embellished in beautiful colors and artwork, and it was just overwhelming. And one of the interesting things about these temples is it wasn't for the common people. The only people that went in here were the priests and the pharaoh, and that's it. Basically just the top leaders. And I noticed here how perfectly embellished all the emperor's wives were, and the queens and the emperor, because these aren't pictures of common people. These are pictures of the pharaoh, or the emperor, if you will. These are pictures of the pharaoh and his wife and the queen, and a lot of great detail. And remember, I didn't touch them, but you can touch all this stuff. And this is 4,000 years old. So this is very, very impressive to be able to be this close and be able to walk through a temple like this. And great detail, even down to the preciseness of the toes and everything. It's so well preserved. And so what a special thing to be able to go inside here. Now, one of the most interesting things about Dendera, where we went, was that there was a replica of what seemed to look like a light bulb. So, you know, they often say that the ancient Egyptian society was very, very sophisticated. And you think about how they built all this. Now, these are solid rock roofs. And so the reason why the pillars were close together is they couldn't span a long distance, so they had lots and lots of pillars, and that supported the ceiling. Now, a lot of the temples that I visited didn't even have ceilings, but this one, because it was kind of like off the beaten track, the ceiling was in pretty good shape. Even some of the painting and artwork was in pretty good shape, which was very, very special to be able to see all that. So, beautifully embellished columns, and then outside a lot of the things they found were laid out and very systematically, so you could see them. Some of the Corinthian columns you see from the Roman period, because there are many periods where Egypt was occupied by Alexander the Great. That's why they call it Alexandria. But all the different carvings and statues, and then my guide who showed me around and my driver, just a beautiful temple, and lots of very interesting things to see. This was a giant swimming pool. Wow, could you imagine that? It had 4 or 5 entryways going in, and look at these huge little water spouts. So the water drained off the roof and through these, and again, more ceilings that were heavily embellished. And very few people were there the whole time. I got to crawl through some very small tunnels and then up some staircases, and there was a music room, a place that was just for music. So they would have a musician in there and entertaining the pharaoh or the queen. And again, look at these beautiful carvings, 4,000 years old. It's hard to get your head around that. Now, these are the light bulbs that I told you about that appears to be a carving of a light bulb, and even a cord, what appears to be a cord connecting it. Who knows what these are all about? And then he went through all these tunnels, and he led me around everywhere. It was really, really, really special. And you'll see in Egypt, you know, they always like a tip. This guy was a guard, and he was showing me all kinds of cool places. There's a point here where I go up a ladder, and every time you go, they always ask you for a little tip everywhere, which I do my best to give them. But look at the detail here of the queen. Just absolutely stunningly beautiful. Now, this is the music room, and then looking down, and then you can just see all this area. I got to go in some very special places where most people don't get to go. There was cordoned off, and then he opened it up and he let me crawl up there and look around. And I got to see some pretty amazing stuff. Honestly, this is the first temple I visited, and honestly, it was the best temple. Unequivocally, the best temple. Now, they're all very, very special. And remember, you don't often go inside buildings that are this old. You know, you go inside a church in Europe, and it's 500, 600, 1,000 years old, and you're impressed. These are 4,000 years old. And then on to our next spot, right outside of Luxor, another temple that I visited. It's just absolutely beautiful. And when I sat to have breakfast, this was right across. Look at these giant pharaohs sitting right across, just absolutely huge. You get a perspective on how big. Now, these were sitting here as an entryway to another temple that we visited. You can see the whole face has been a little bit destroyed. I'm sure people have taken pieces off of it. And then this is Valley of the Kings and Queens. And it was very, very impressive. But I got to tell you, so hot, you can't even take it for very long. And this was in May, the very 1st of May. I would definitely not go to Egypt past April. It just gets too hot. And then on to Luxor Temple. And then from Luxor Temple, there's a huge entryway that goes all the way down to Karnak Temple, and this is really one of the most famous ones and the oldest ones. And to get from one place to the other, we went on a little boat ride on the Nile, and it was just really special. Being on the Nile, you know, I read about it in the Bible, of baby Moses being found on the Nile. It's a very special thing to be on the Nile. And this is that walkway that was over 2-3 miles long that led from Luxor Temple all the way to Karnak Temple. And the emperor would go down here, parade down here from one temple to another. They even had a moat system bringing water from the Nile that allowed the emperor to come on a boat to these different temples. Just absolutely fascinating. And as you can see, just a forest of columns that are massive. And as we walked in the beginning, look at the obelisk here on the left-hand side. There were 2 of them. There's one right there on this side, but it's gone. It's in Paris, I believe, at the Louvre. I kind of think they should return it, but you know, I'm not going to get too far into it. But look at these giant pharaohs at the entryway as well. So the French and the British and the German, I believe, restored a lot of these temples, because you look at these and you think to yourself, man, they look like they're in pretty good shape, really. Could they have been in this good a condition after 4,000 years? Well, the answer is not really. There were remnants of these temples, and there were remnants of this huge walkway. And as they excavated, they found those remnants, and they reconstructed a lot of this. And the guy, the boat driver, let me use the boat here. It was so cool. Egyptian people are really, really nice, very friendly. Egypt can be a little bit of a tough place because it's not very clean, and you know, it's a little rough around the edges, but I found the people just to be wonderful. And it took me a little while to fully understand what was going on, but this is one of those walkways that I was telling you about. And then I visited the Carnac Temple at night for the night show, and it was great. And the next morning, I woke up super early in the morning, and I went on a balloon ride. Now, I heard this was really, really special to fly over Luxor in a balloon as the sun's coming up. We left a little bit later than the sun coming up because there was a little too much wind and it would have blown the balloons all over the place. But I videotaped the whole staging of this process, and it was really incredible. And before long, of course, our balloon was up in the air, and I'll tell you, a lot of heat comes off those torches when they let those things go up. And here we are, over Luxor, over the Valley of the Kings. You can see the Nile. It's just really amazing because because there are so many ruins. They're everywhere, all throughout these mountains and hillside, and so many balloons up in the air too. I was shocked how many balloons they could put up, and they put them up fast. The second they say go, everybody starts putting the fans in there, the balloons all get pumped up, then the heat goes on, and within probably 10 minutes, everybody's soaring in the air. And look, we're looking down on all the ruins here, and you can see that, this one hasn't been restored at the same level, and you can see the ones that have been put together more. They spent a lot more time restoring them. This would be a typical one. Not a lot left, a couple statues, and that's it, a couple pharaohs, but a lot of area in destruction and ruin. And the Egyptologists or the historians have done a great job putting this together. And then when you're done with the balloon ride, you don't land. They actually throw a cord down and they drag you back to the starting place, because you can't just land way out in the middle of nowhere. Now, when I did this in Africa, we landed in the middle of nowhere and they chased after you and picked you up. But there's houses and there's places, so they just drag you back to the same spot and pull the balloon down. And the next thing you know, we are crossing the Nile again in a little boat and over to Luxor Temple. Now, Luxor Temple is one of the most famous ones. It's smaller though than the Karnak. And Carnac is massive. Now you see some of these columns were tilted over. They put them back together. You can see the place where they restored them. That's part of the restoration process. But I highly recommend going to Luxor and going to visit some of these sites. This is considered one of the oldest civilization in the world and some of the oldest historical sites. Karnak Temple is absolutely massive as well. So one of my biggest regrets in life is that I waited so long, 62 years old, to go to Egypt. I must be out of my mind. You can't really understand the world unless you've been to Egypt. Egypt played such a central role in the development of civilizations. It's very important to go to Egypt, particularly if you're a Christian. You should know from a historical standpoint what took place there, because it's very, very interesting. It really puts a whole different spin on the biblical stories that we were raised with. So after Karnak Temple, it was back to El Gouna, about a 4-hour bumpy drive on a long road through the desert. But I had a wonderful time, and my guide and driver were over the top, but there's nothing quite like El Gouna.